What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, we're going to go through some of my final thoughts ahead of the Gameweek 14 deadline, take a look at some press conference updates, check out how my team is looking, thoughts on transfers and stuff like that, and answer some of your questions. So if you enjoy this video and you do find it useful, please do give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you're new around here. And who else could we start with? Other than Erling Haaland. We were all waiting for the press conference updates from Pep Guardiola today, and this is what he had to say. He feels better, but we will train this afternoon, and we will assess in a few hours. We will see how he is feeling, and then we will decide. So he hasn't been completely ruled out, and he isn't guaranteed to start either. You have to say he's a little bit of a doubt, and I know because of the amount of goals and stuff that he scored so far this year, people find it really hard to look at him and kind of even put him as a doubt. But I think if this was any other player, we will be going into this week a little bit worried about whether or not he's going to start. And that's how I'm feeling about Erling Haaland. Now, some people have asked me whether or not I would sell him. Absolutely not. Like, maybe if this was 3 weeks to go until the end of the season, and especially for someone like me where my overall rank isn't looking too good, possibly I would take that risk to just sell him, hope he doesn't start, and really hope he doesn't do anything in the next two fixtures. The problem is we've got a lot of money tied up in him. If he's not, if he's fully fit after the World Cup, obviously I know he's not playing, but as long as he gets through that break with no issues, we're all going to have him in our team. So I don't want to lose that value. And for game weeks 15 and 16, if he's definitely back for them, he's going to be captain in both of those weeks anyway. So there's no need to sell him, right? The other thing is that a lot of people are hoping for early team news, and obviously I'm hoping for that as well, but I wouldn't rely on it. I would have a plan of what you're going to do if you don't hear whether he's starting or not, because ultimately we don't necessarily get reliable Man City news. We often get it for Liverpool, for example, but not necessarily Man City. So then the biggest question comes, do you still captain him this week? Because I think most people were going to put the captain's armband on him. And again, I just think if this was any other player, there'd probably be enough doubt there where we would move the armband, but people are going to be afraid to do it because of just what Erling Haaland can do. I'll be honest, I'm tempted to move the armband. I know people are going to say, yeah, but you're always going to do that anyway. I think I would have kept it on Haaland if there was no doubts about him, because I just cannot take that pain anymore. But even if he plays, how many minutes is he going to get? That's also another thing to consider. And look, the fixture is pretty good. Leicester conceded a lot of chances to Wolves last week. Despite the amount of clean sheets Danny Ward has had so far, that is still not a very good defence, that Leicester defence. So Man City could have a field day there, and if Haaland starts, happy days, right? He could go and get another 2 or 3 goals, but there is some doubt with that. My mind keeps going back to that quote that Pep said towards the start of the season. Not that Pep said, but it was written about the fact that one of the reasons Haaland wanted to go to Man City was that if he did have any injuries or stuff like that, they wouldn't push him to play. Now, we also have to take into account that Pep said he wouldn't play kind of every 3 days, and he has done that quite a few times. So whether or not, if he's got a bit of a knock, they'll rest him or make him play, it's hard to know. But all those thoughts just make me think, maybe, despite everything that's happened, especially for me over the last few weeks in terms of captaincy points, maybe this is the time to just go against him, knowing that in 15 and 16, that's a good time to kind of put the armband back on him. So you lot can obviously decide for yourselves what you want to do. For most people, I think they're of the school of thought that he'll either play or he'll completely miss out. And if you think there's no chance of him coming on for a cameo, then you should probably just captain him and have your vice captain on someone else. Obviously, it could be Salah, Kane, Saka, whoever you think is the next best option in your team. If you do think there is a chance he doesn't start and it could come on for a cameo, yes, of course he could score plenty of goals in 15, 20, 30 minutes. But if you do think that's a possibility, then maybe you should look to just move your captain in general, not just your vice captain. I don't know if there's much point in discussing who is the best next captain, really, because for most people, you don't have both Kane and Salah. If you do, I think it's Salah, but for most of us, it's one or the other. So I'm obviously not going to consider Kane because I don't own him, so I'll just put it on Salah. Someone like Nunez or Saka or Jesus, they could all be options as well, but I think most of you are probably just going to keep it on Haaland with this news, unless we get confirmation tomorrow that he's on the bench. And if he's on the bench, I don't think there's any doubt that captaincy armband should move. But right now, we don't know if that's the case. Obviously, the deadline's on Saturday. We might get some embargoed news news from the press conference later on tonight. That will be around 10:30. But the chances of that information being that Haaland is going to start or he's definitely not are very, very low, because those questions would have been asked in the same press conference that Pep said we'll only know in a few hours. So that's kind of the latest. I don't know if it helps you or not. I'm tempted to move the armband. Let's look at my team. So before we look at my team, let's just talk about the latest on Domagoj Solanke. I know he's not massively owned in the community, but a few of you would have picked him up over the last couple of weeks because he's done really well. And for game weeks 15 and 16, the fixtures aren't bad for Bournemouth. Leeds away and Everton at home. So if you need a cheap forward, possibly just to replace someone else or to use those funds elsewhere, then you're going to need to know whether he's going to be back for that week. So I took this from the Bournemouth website. Domagoj Solanke is a lot better than expected. Someone did point out to me that that could just mean, you know, they expected him to be out for 2 months and now it will just be 1 month. But it does get better. There's good news and he's recovered well. As a result of that, we're hopeful of him playing at the weekend. So this is the Spurs game in game week 14, but we'll have to wait and see. So for anyone that owns him, if you've got a decent bench like Andreas Pereira or a defender you can bring on, I think it's probably worth benching him unless you've got that money to upgrade him to like a Skamaka, but even he's got Man United away this week. You want to take a punt on Calvert-Lewin, bring in Wilson or Tony. If you've got that kind of cash, you could just move him on, because I think those players are ultimately better than Solanke anyway. But if you're like me, you don't really have the cash to do that and you are hoping to play him in game weeks 15 and 16, this looks pretty good. I'm probably going to look to bench him and then obviously just play someone else. And if he is back for Leeds away and Everton at home, then we can just play him for those fixtures instead. So I know he's not massively owned, but if you've got Domagoj Solanke, the panic is almost over. He could even feature this week. Alright, let's have a quick look at my team. Obviously, I did team selection on Wednesday. There were quite a few potential transfers that I had in mind. I'm not going to use one on a goalkeeper. Like I said, it just feels a little bit passive with only 3 weeks to go. Yes, there are other goalkeepers that will probably outscore Danny Ward, but I'm hoping that the gap won't be that massive when you take into account possible save points and even possible clean sheets after this week as well. As lots of people pointed out, if I was going to make a change, I would remove Everson and not Ward as long as I could afford it, because I might as well keep the goalkeeper that's playing for a very cheap price. But if you could get me one more clean sheet over the next 3 games, that would be incredible value for how much he's cost. He's already got me more points than I expected, but if you could get one more, that would be amazing. So I'm not going to transfer him out. I also talked about doing Gay to Gabriel. He is now a doubt as well, so I'm not going to do that move either. We'll see if we get more information on that later on, but I probably just won't make that move. So I am probably going to bench Solanke. We don't know if he's definitely out. As I just spoke about, he could play, but I'm going to play Andreas Pereira instead and just hold Solanke for game weeks 15 and 16, because I think those fixtures are pretty good. And obviously he's cheap and I've only got 0.9 million in the bank. I do have my captaincy on Haaland. I think it's one of those situations where had I captained Haaland last week, which I intended to do for pretty much the whole week, right up until about 2 or 3 minutes to go on the deadline stream, and you know, it was killing me about whether or not to change it to Salah, and I do regret it, and I do think it was a mistake because of all the reasons I've spoke about already. But I think what's annoying for me now is because I didn't do that, anytime I even mention Salah, it's like a bit of a meme now. But had I gone for Haaland last week and got those points, I don't even think I would be questioning the captaincy switch this week. The only reason I'm kind of afraid to take it off Haaland is because of everything that's happened, and rightly so, because the guy is an absolute machine, and if he does start against Leicester, there's every chance that he gets a decent amount of points. But if he is a doubt, I think I've got to swap it, and I think I probably will. Unless we find out tomorrow he's definitely starting, I'm fairly sure I'm going to go with Salah. I think it's really frustrating the amount of points he's got in the league so far, when he's just got another goal and assist in the Champions League, and this time you can't say it was only Rangers, it was Ajax this time. And look, I get it, I think they're only on 3 points in that group and they had to go and attack because they needed to win the game and stuff like that. But Salah played well again, got the goal and assist. Like, it's just frustrating what he's done in the league. So I'm not making excuses. If you don't want to captain Salah, absolutely don't captain Salah. But I just think if I'd gone for Haaland last week, I'd almost certainly just put it on Salah this week and be done with it. The only thing that's making me question that is because I messed up last week. Should that affect what I do this week? Probably not. So if Haaland starts, I think I'll probably switch it back if we know that for sure. If we don't, I think I'm going to stick with Salah. Home game against Leeds. I know I said it for Nottingham Forest, but can I really worry about that game? And if I don't even know. If Haaland blanks or doesn't play in that first fixture, at least I can go into Saturday night knowing that I can't be massively punished. I can still be punished because Kane could absolutely smash it and Salah may not, but it won't be as bad as when Haaland gets a hat-trick and you haven't captained him. So that's my thoughts there. In terms of transfers, the only one I'm really considering now, unless we found out that Haaland was out for the next 3 weeks, in which case I would sell him for Kane, not worry about the team value and just do it. But I don't think he's going to be out, right? Otherwise, Pep would have said it today. The only transfer I'm considering is Zaha to Saka. Now, I think I'm going to do it. I'm not massively happy about it because what I should have done is got Saka last week, then had Saka and Zaha this week and brought in Foden in game week 15. But I can't dwell on that too much more because the move has been made now. I brought Foden in last week, even though I knew I'd want Saka for this week. So it'll probably be, although Saka's gone up in price, so did Zaha. So I haven't really lost anything in that regard. I will probably just bring Saka in. I'll have 0.3 in the bank. Now, I don't necessarily think that Saka is massively better than Zaha for the next 3 weeks. But I do think he's better, right? And with only 3 weeks left and not a huge amount of other things to worry about in my team right now, as long as Solanke's back next week, as long as the Haaland injury doesn't turn into a bigger thing, I haven't got a huge amount of transfers to make, and we are going to get that reset for the World Cup. So it makes me less worried about making these kind of moves. If there was no unlimited transfers and my next wildcard was going to be used in like game weeks 30 or 33 or something like that, I think I would probably hold on to Zaha and go into next week with 2 free transfers. And don't get me wrong, I could go into next week with a bunch of injuries. Who knows, someone could get red carded and I wish I had 2 free transfers to deal with it. But I don't think I can kind of worry about those kind of things. So I think I'm going to make the move. I will give myself as much thinking time about that as possible. But I just don't want to go into Nottingham Forest at home with only one Arsenal attacker. A few people have kind of mentioned that maybe Arsenal are starting to slow down a little bit. The result in Europe wasn't that great. You know, are they getting a little bit fatigued? And you can probably say that about any team that's in Europe that hasn't been able to rotate. Like, look at Salah and Firmino. They've had to play a lot of minutes right now. It's not necessarily ideal, but I don't think I can bet against Arsenal, against Nottingham Forest at home, when Forest just haven't defended that well for most of the season and Arsenal have been absolutely brilliant at home. So if any of you I've just got that, like, I've got that kind of gut feeling where I'm really not sure selling Zaha is the right move. There's just something about it that doesn't sit right with me, but I'm probably still going to do it. If you think you can do better things with 2 free transfers next week, you could hold off on that move because obviously Saka and Martinelli and Jesus are going to run straight into Chelsea away. But I think I'm still going to do it. I just think he is better over the next 3 weeks, even if it's not massively better. Okay, so let's go back to some of the latest injury news. This is taken from an article on Fantasy Football Scat, and this bit's about Jarrod Bowen specifically. So he did miss the game in Europe on Thursday with a minor ankle problem, and David Moyes only told reporters that the midfielder had done a little bit of running on the grass with more assessments to follow. So he is a doubt, a little bit like Haaland. He's not been completely ruled out, but we don't know if he's going to play either. So if you were someone that was kind of 50-50 on whether to sell him, or you kind of did want to do it, but you weren't sure, this would probably push me into making the transfer. Man United away is not necessarily an easy game. Yes, they're going to be missing Varane. It's probably going to be Martinez plus one of Lindelof or Harry Maguire because he got some minutes in Europe last night as well. Realistically, it's probably going to be Lindelof, but that's still not going to be an easy fixture. Jarrod Bowen's underlying numbers are quite down on last year as well, and he probably doesn't have penalties anymore either. So I think the fixtures in game weeks 15 and 16 are pretty good, and I think in normal circumstances there definitely wouldn't be a rush to get rid of him. But I think if you were looking to make a move on him, this is probably now the week to do it because he is a doubt. Man United away, not that great anyway. We've only got 2 game weeks left after this. If it goes wrong, it's not going to be the end of the world for just 2 game weeks, right? So I would probably, if you've got nothing else to do and you were looking at moving him on anyway, I would just probably go ahead and do that. I think it's easier to get rid of Bowen this week than it is to get rid of Zaha, for example. There was kind of a question about this as well. So Bowen to Saka looks obvious now. This is based around the fact that he is a bit of a doubt, but it means for this specific person, it means I'll be on triple Arsenal attack. Is it worth it with Chelsea away and Wolves away to come, or should I look for a different midfielder? Ultimately, you should just be going for the best replacement for Jarrod Bowen. If you think that's Saka, you should be going for Saka. And I get the idea why people don't like to triple up on teams, like especially, you know, triple attack rather than like maybe 1 or 2 defenders plus 1 or 2 attackers. I get it, because if they do have a bad day, an off day, where, you know, Chelsea go and win 1-0, then you get no points from any of those players. But I would kind of try and look at it independently, right? I don't know which 2 Arsenal attackers you've already got. I'm going to assume it's kind of Jesus and Martinelli. What they do doesn't really matter to how good Saka is as an option. And if you think he is the standout 8 million or standout midfielder choice for the money you've got to spend, he should still be the one that you get. Because what if the 2 players you already own blank and Saka goes and gets like 2 or 3 goals, right? You're going to be annoyed you missed out on that. And just because you've got the other 2 doesn't mean they will definitely get points. So I get it. The 2 fixtures afterwards, both away games. Chelsea away is not easy. But the Arsenal attack has been very good so far this season. So unless you're maybe looking at a Foden or someone like that instead, you know, I think ultimately you should be going for the player that you think is the best option. If that's Saka, I would try and ignore the fact that you've already got 2 other Arsenal attackers. Bearing in mind, it wasn't too long ago, basically game week 13 after that blank, everyone was trying to get at least 2, possibly even 3 Arsenal attackers in. So not much has changed apart from the fact they only scored 1 goal against Southampton. This week's fixture is pretty decent. They could get something Chelsea away and Wolves away. So I still think it's a good move. With Bowen in general, I think at this point, if you want to get rid of him, you probably can. So this question's about Rashford and kind of differentials as well, but it does also mention Saka and Bowen. I did have a look through the questions like 2 or 3 times, but as you might imagine, lots of people are considering similar players, especially with only 3 game weeks left. The options are kind of narrowed down a little bit ahead of that reset we're going to get for the World Cup. So is Rashford a reasonable alternative to Saka as the Bowen replacement? The money saved allows me to do Mitrovic to Nunez. So there's a few things to think about. One is like differentials. One is just specifically Saka versus Rashford. So if you're asking me about Saka versus Rashford, I do think Saka is the better option, but I do think for the money, Rashford is the best option if you've already got Martinelli. I know we've looked at kind of cheaper midfielders this week, Almiron, Eze, Iwobi, Gordon, players like that, but unless you really need to save the money, I would personally go up to Rashford. And if you want to go a bit different, and this is sort of ties in with what I always talk about, plus what we talked about yesterday on the Game Week preview. So I do not think you need to go out of your way to be different, considering we're only in Game Week 14. We're only going into Game Week 14, and we've missed a Game Week, remember? I think it was Game Week 7 that was completely cancelled. So there hasn't been that much of this season gone so far, right? So there's no need to panic, but if you are going to look for differentials, these are the type of players to be looking at. Rashford and Nunez, who in their own right are just good options. They just happen to be differentials as well. So these are the kind of players I would be looking at. The likes of like Iwobi as a differential, that just doesn't excite me at all. But Nunez versus kind of whoever they got this week, Leeds at home, I've forgotten then. Obviously, they got Southampton at home in game week 16, and Rashford with West Ham, Villa, and Fulham to come as well. They are kind of nice differentials, and I do think Rashford, if you're going for an attacker, is the one to go for at Man United. It's going to be interesting to see what Ten Hag does over the next couple of weeks, because he did say he wanted to see Rashford and Ronaldo together, which is why he brought Rashford on at half-time. So I don't know if he's going to do that in the league that often, but we'll see what happens. But I do think Saka is the better option than Rashford, if that's what we're talking about. Whether or not Mitrovic to Nunez is a good move is interesting, because if you're going to make that move, you really want to do it this week. Like, yes, Mitrovic has Man City away next week, but Nunez has got Spurs away. So I don't know if he's that much better, especially when you know that Mitrovic minutes are very good. He's also on penalties too. So if you're going to do it, you're going to do it this week. But Mitrovic's fixture isn't quite as good. But honestly, if it's Saka versus Mitrovic, Saka and Mitrovic versus Rashford and Nunez, I do think on paper Saka and Mitrovic are better, but I don't think Nunez and Rashford are bad if you want to go a little bit different. I actually really like Nunez this week because he came off fairly early in the Champions League. That is one of the issues with him. He doesn't necessarily get to 90 minutes that often. But I think there could be goals in that game against Leeds. And Nunez keeps getting chances every time he plays. He's going to get a haul sooner rather than later. Alright, so this question's about team value. Is it worth holding players like Mitrovic and Maddison solely because of team value with the World Cup on the horizon? Now, I'm not going to focus specifically on these two players because some of you will have money tied up in them. For some of you, it will be money tied up in other players, right? So we'll talk about the point a little bit more broadly. My general opinion on team value is it can be important later on for those big double game weeks where you want the more expensive players. And generally, when you play FPL, you always want the players that cost more. It doesn't have to be in a double game week. It could just be for game weeks 14, 15, 16, etc. I know there's always value players out there, the likes of Rashford we talked about. Almiron's popular right now. People have started looking at Iwobi, etc. Right? So there are cheap players. But if all the players right now were priced the same and I gave you 200 million to spend, I'm pretty sure your team would be full of like Kane and Haaland and maybe Nunez. You might keep Mitrovic, he's done really well, but Salah and Son, Saka, etc. You wouldn't be looking at Almiron or Rashford or players like that, right? I don't think so, not for the most part. So it can be important, but I wouldn't let it rule the decisions that you make. Now, whether or not you should hold a player really depends on how quickly you're going to want them back, right? Either in the next couple of weeks or possibly even after the World Cup, right? And I think the problem most people have with players when they've had them early and they've built up a lot of money is they see it as losing money and not gaining money, right? So let's say you've made 0.3 million on Maddison, but he's got Man City this week, 2 away games after that. You're probably not going to want him back after the World Cup. What's the issue with selling him? You've then got 0.3 million to spend elsewhere, and the chances are you probably aren't going to want him back anytime soon. And if you're thinking that, other people will be thinking that, and they might sell him. And if that happens, the price then comes down. So you've made 0.3 million, and he's going to cost you 0.3 million more. But if he goes down in price, he's only going to cost you 0.2 million more. If he goes down again, it's only 0.1. And it might get to a point where you're buying him for the same price you originally bought him for, apart from you've made money on him, right? So don't see it as losing money necessarily, see it as gaining money. But obviously with players like Haaland, for example, I spoke about, you know, whether or not you should sell him this week. Absolutely not, because if he's fit next week, you're definitely going to want him, and you do not want to pay that money to get him back. So in my view, that would be losing money. But in some cases, it's actually gaining money. Whether or not you should worry about them because of the World Cup really depends on whether you're going to want them back after the World Cup, right? Because if you're not, it doesn't really matter. So what I would do, I know I said I wasn't going to focus on these two players, but as they were used as examples, I would go and look at the fixtures and I would look at what they are after the World Cup. Now, that starts from 17 onwards, and obviously you are going to have unlimited transfers, so you can pretty much get in anyone you want as long as the budget fits. So I would look at the first 2 games and think, well, Newcastle at home, Liverpool away, not necessarily great, but they're pretty decent after that. Fulham, Forest and Brighton. So I haven't given unlimited transfer teams much of a thought so far. I will obviously do that over the break and there'll be videos, but I don't know if Maddison's necessarily going to be a must, so I don't know if that would worry me. Mitrovic has obviously got 2 toughish fixtures to end the season. You know what I mean? It does feel like it's the end, right? It does almost feel like that same thing that happens when we get towards the end of the season. It all feels a bit quiet. We're not really sure what's going to happen over the last couple of weeks. And, you know, we know what our overall rank is, etc. Like, it feels a little bit like that, even though we've got a lot of the season still to go. So forgive me if I keep saying the end of the season. You know what I mean. Mitrovic does have fairly good fixtures afterwards, and he is also quite cheap as well. So if you've got a lot of money built up on him, yeah, maybe you do keep him. Then maybe you just have him on your unlimited transfers after the World Cup, and you haven't had to pay any extra for him. And you can kind of do that exercise with any single player that you've got, right? So the same with a lot of us with Martinelli. He's gone from 6 to 6.8. We're definitely going to want him for the last 3 game weeks, I think. And the fixtures aren't amazing afterwards, but they're okay. And for 6 million, he's probably still going to be one of the best value midfielders. So that might make me think more about whether or not I should sell him. But ultimately, I wouldn't let it rule all the decisions that you want to make. If you think there's a player that's going to score 5 to 10 plus points more than Maddison over the next 3 weeks, and you're not definitely going to want him after the World Cup, I would just sell him. I wouldn't worry about that money. Try and get the points. And obviously, if you do bring in players that get more points, they've got a chance of going up in price. You've got a chance of making more money. So the broad answer is, don't let it dictate all your decisions, but you do need to take it on a case-by-case basis. Take a look at the fixtures after the World Cup. Is there a chance you might want them? If not, or if it's very unlikely, you can probably get away with selling them without any issues. If you've enjoyed that video, make sure to give it a like, hit that subscribe button if you're new around here, and I'll catch you tomorrow for the deadline stream.